Welcome to Rainier Avenue Radio. This is Afternoons with Monique, recording live in Seattle, Washington, every Thursday at 1 p.m.
Good afternoon, Seattle. This is Monique Lee from the Afternoons with Monique show. We're on Rainier Avenue Radio. It is the end of the year. This is the last episode on Afternoons with Monique, and I have the pleasure of inviting one of our community leaders, an attorney and a chair of the Northwest Justice Project, joining us on our show to talk about consumer protection and consumer law, among other things that he does for our community. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Brandon Donckers.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here, Monique, very much.
Of course. Now, Brandon, I've known of your name for quite a few years. I've even spoken with you previously about some consumer case many years ago, and now it's my pleasure to have you on the show. I would love to share a little bit of your background and your work history, as well as how, as your journey to become chairman of the Northwest Justice Project and some of the work that you do. So let me start at the beginning. Tell us a little bit about where you're from and your pursuit of the law degree and your practice of law.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here on Rainier Avenue Radio. I grew up right off of Rainier Avenue in the South End. Lake Ridge was the neighborhood, which is kind of right in between Skyway, Rainier Beach, Bryn Mawr, and Renton. And so it's wonderful to be here. So I grew up in the South End. My family goes back a couple generations in the South End. And so South Seattle is a place that's very close to my heart. And I grew up going to public schools for the most part until halfway through high school. And I asked my parents if I could join a good friend of mine at a private school. I was kind of falling behind academically a little bit and losing some of my motivation. And I was lucky enough that my parents were able to send me to a private school, and it really opened up my eyes. We're reading really complicated, high-level, collegiate-level texts, and I'd never been exposed to complicated issues in the way that this private school did, reading things like Pedagogy of the Oppressed from Paulo Freire, and thinking about things from the perspective of, a non-dominant history, and really being exposed to critical thought and other ideas. And it really opened my mind to what I wanted to do in the future.
Now, what public school did you go to, and what private school did you join after that?
Yeah, I went to Renton High School my first couple of years. I went through the Renton School District, Campbell Hill Elementary, and then Nelson up on the hill. Mm-hmm. And then we transferred to Eastside Catholic. One of my best friends that I grew up with way back in Campbell Hill was at Eastside Catholic. His parents had sent him to private school, and he said, "Hey, Brendan, this I'm having a really good time. It's a great education." And I kind of begged my parents to give me an opportunity to do it, and it wasn't an easy conversation to go from public schools to having to being able to afford going to a private school. But I was lucky enough to be able to do it for a couple of years, so it made a big difference to me.
I have a high schooler right now, and I'm contemplating the question of a public school versus private school. Of course, I'm a big proponent of having critical thinking instilled on my daughter. So yeah, definitely that is a question that is also on my mind. And where did you go to college and law school?
Yeah, I went to Santa Clara in California.
Mm-hmm.
I played basketball through school and had hoop dreams always going through high school. And I'd heard of Steve Nash, who was a basketball player back in the 90s, who was doing well at Santa Clara. And so that opened my eyes to Santa Clara, hearing about the school that way, and visited. And it was a really, it was going to be a good fit. Smaller classrooms, great arts and sciences reputation. Mm-hmm. And so I had a really good experience in the South Bay at Santa Clara. And then I went to college at Seattle, law school at Seattle U. I spent 2 years in DC in between law school and college. I worked for former Congressman Jim McDermott that represented Seattle.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, it was my first job out of college, was his field director on his
Oh,
campaign.
wow.
And so it was basically running around putting up yard signs, and in 2002. And it was a really turbulent time, I think, in Seattle and around the country, because conversations about invading Iraq, and at the time, Congressman McDermott spoke boldly about his concerns about the U.S. going into invading Iraq, and it was a really fascinating time to work for him. So I went out to DC and spent some time out there, but I knew that Seattle was always going to be home, and came back to SU for law school.
I think it's really neat that you have your root in Seattle here, and then you travel around, learn different things at different places, Santa Clara, DC. You gather your worldly experience and you bring what you learn. And of course, Jim McDermott is a longtime politician here in Mercer Island, I think. So what brought you to civil litigation and consumer law? I know on your website you cover quite a few consumer civil litigation, among many other specialties that I believe a plaintiff attorney, which you are, cover. Can you explain some of the not topic, but disciplines of law that you hone skills for?
Sure. Yeah. And you'll meet a lot of lawyers that specialize in certain areas of law. And I wouldn't call myself as a specialty in one specific, subject area. What I really love to do is to fight for people that are needing help. And most of the people that come to me are facing a traumatic situation, like losing their home, losing their apartment, losing a job, facing discrimination, being prevented from accessing areas of our community where they may have a right to, and or not being able to live peaceably. So it's really big issues that I try to look at in my practice. And it comes from having a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, a guy from the South End that's always been just a tiny bit pissed off about things, and being able to fight for people and give them some voice when they're facing really difficult situations. I didn't intend to be in the world of consumer law that we know consumer law affects now, or that involves now. It was really when I was a brand new lawyer in 2000 and late 2008 and 2009, when the financial crisis was hitting, and an organization called the Northwest Justice Project that I now have the privilege of being on the board of, and the tail end of my board presidency. The Northwest Justice Project was putting a foreclosure prevention unit together to fight banks that were taking people's homes illegally. The perspective would be without following the processes, or taking advantage or abuse of folks. And so they were staffing up on foreclosure protection laws and litigation coming out of foreclosure. And an email went out and said, we're looking for private attorney volunteers. And I responded right away. And I ended up having a great opportunity to work with some of the staff attorneys at the Northwest Justice Project, fighting big banks that were taking advantage of folks and taking people's homes. And so that really exposed me to the Northwest Justice Project for the first time way back in 2009. And we had a really fun case against some of the big banks that securitized people's loans and bundled up in big financial packages, and forgetting about the people at the end that are, losing something that's very dear in their biggest asset for many folks. So that's when I first heard about NJP. Yeah.
What's that? I'm sorry.
That's when I first heard about the Northwest Justice Project. I was just so impressed with what they were doing, and then the quality of attorneys, and to be able to learn from folks that knew what they were doing. I've just tried to continue to take on interesting cases that make sense. Now,
I don't know if you remember or had a chance to read a little bit about my background, but I have a financial background, and 2009, 2008, 2009 were major years where lots of MBS, mortgage-backed securities, and foreclosures were happening, and which is when you step in and into that role. And I understand this is a pro bono position where you help people who couldn't afford an attorney to fight with these banks. Were you talking to the national banks, or were they regional banks, or what kind of organization were you up against during that time?
Yeah, well, most of the time, we sue several banks, and it's because several banks have their hands in a loan. And
Right.
so you may have 3 different servicers that may be involved in servicing a loan over a short period of time, and the borrower is left wondering well, I was talking to so and so last month, and now you're telling me it's someone else,
They
and
sold
next
it.
month it's gonna be someone else.
Right, right.
So, and if you go up the chain, as you know, and I did get a chance to read about some of the impressive stuff that you've done in your background, Monique, and you know that it's not just the servicers, it's folks that have an interest all the way up, and folks that are, large entities that are trying, have a claim to getting the proceeds from loan streams. And when you multiply that out to thousands, the guys at the top are making a lot of money. And what I saw happen from my perspective, and I expect it'll continue, especially as we come out of the next rounds of moratorium being lifted,
Right.
is that people are left without banks or lenders or servicers giving them clear answers. And that's when problems start to complicate. It's not just a non-payment, but it's not finding out clear instructions about what to do next, what they can do to cure things, and
Right.
where to go to get help. And so that breakdown in communication can often result in litigation. But it's no surprise. It's banks, national banks, that are involved in this as much as anyone else.
Right. Number one, I've known before I delve deep into the subject of predatory lending and consumer rights in those in that specific topic, which I invited you to speak on today. I want to reiterate the position that you, as an attorney and a good guy in the community. I actually happen to know Brandon a little bit, and because I called him myself for some issues in the past, and he was kind enough to talk to me, uncompensated, and explain things to me in a way that, not condescending, and allow me to understand what it was, and which is why I remember Brandon, when I now have a radio show, to invite him on. And then I'm surprised to learn that he had become the president of the Northwest Justice Project, which is a very credible and extraordinary organization in the community who help low income and people who can't afford lawyers to preserve their consumer or their civil rights and other rights, human rights in the community. And I think that's important for me to emphasize here, because when I invite people on my show, I like to talk to people who, have a goal, have an interest, who are interesting, who are well informed, to educate the community on how they can protect themselves. And someone credible like you, having on the show is a privilege for me to, explore this topic. And that's why before I ask you these questions coming up, I want to just, people who are tuning in, understand why I'm having Brandon on today. And again, Brandon is an attorney, a partner at, what's the name of your law firm that you're now partner at?
Breskin Johnson Townsend.
Right. And that is a plaintiff attorney's type of law.
Yes. Yeah, we do. Yeah, we represent mainly workers or consumers, either in individual cases or in class actions. Someone's doing something wrong and someone needs an attorney, and most of the cases that we take on are contingency, which means that, we won't, we don't get paid unless we get some kind of a result for our clients. And, there are other lawyers that do contingency cases, but they're risky. But it's important because there is such a huge gap between people that have access to legal representation and those that can get it. And, the Northwest Justice Project is one example of an organization that that tries to fill that gap a little bit when there may not be a law that gives a right of attorney's fees to a prevailing party, like in many of the cases we do. It's just a family law issue or another issue that may come up that the Northwest Justice Project can step in on. And there's great resources on the NJP website. So if I can plug that website, Monique, if that's all right to
Yes,
share that website.
absolutely.
It's
Yeah, go ahead.
it's just nwjustice.org. And so you can Google search Northwest Justice Project and find it. But there's lots of information about how you can contact NJP through the Clear Line to try and find help if you need an attorney,
211.
and also information for folks that need it about what their rights are.
Right. Yeah, since we're talking about Northwest Justice Project, so I have two sections. One is about that nonprofit, and the other part is your private practice where you help people with consumer law. But I believe one side you work with low-income people, and on the other side you work with bigger cases. And I didn't know that your law firm represent folks on class action cases as well. That's surprising to me. So let's talk about the Northwest Justice Project and how you, in the last, I think you joined them in 2008 or 9, and it's been 12 years, and now you have the honor of serving as chairman. That's a pretty prestigious position that involves someone that had contributed greatly to the organization, that have earned credibility and bring and bring knowledge to and service to that organization. So, I mean, tell me how you became the chairman for the Board of Trustees after you were serving as a pro bono attorney.
Yeah, so we worked on that case that I mentioned from 2000 and I think it was 2010 to maybe 2012. It took a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just an attorney working with NJP, and I had such a great experience and was so impressed as I got to know more about the organization that a member of the board encouraged me to apply to the board. And like many folks, they looked at the application, said, thank you very much. We have a lot of applicants. And so I had to apply a couple of times before they finally let me on the board. But I got on the board, I think it was in 2015, I believe 2016, and I'm in my third year of board presidency. And the board president position is just a position that's elected by your fellow board members. And I really can't emphasize enough how impressive the NJP board is, which reflects
Absolutely.
not only attorneys from all over the state of Washington, but also members of the community that we have represented as clients are on our board. We have 1/3 of the board are former NJP clients. And it's a really fantastic mix of folks that bring different life experiences to the table and help us lead the organization. And I say help really intentionally because the staff at the NJP, which is almost 200 advocates across the state, I think there's 18 offices now, is really, so the leadership staff and the attorneys and everyone that provides support to folks needing help across the state are the real heroes of NJP. The board works hard, but the heroes are really the advocates and the staff that is doing the hard work for folks across the state.
How many attorneys are those out of 200?
I believe it's 200 advocates. So I believe there are 200 attorneys,
Really?
About that number. And we're hiring more because, the NJP is funded partially by the federal government and partially by the state government. And there's also a small mix of private donations. And so there's different restrictions on all of those funding sources. But the state has given us some new resources to help eviction folks that are facing eviction. Low-income tenants across the state that are facing eviction, which we're, again, with these moratoria that are going to be lifted, we're sadly going to see more of. And so the number's growing, is where I'm going with that answer to your question, Monique. But I believe we're above 200 advocates across the state, and that's attorneys, not to mention staff and leadership.
Right. We are midway into the show, a little bit past midway. This is Rainier Avenue Radio, and you are on the Afternoons with Monique show. I'm Monique Lee, your host, and today I have the pleasure of inviting Northwest Justice Project Board of Trustees President and attorney at, what's the name of the law firm one more time?
Yeah, Breskin Johnson Townsend.
Yes, Breskin Johnson.
Breskin Johnson Townsend, yeah.
All right. On my show.
I should just close up, Monique, and just call it Donckers Law, shouldn't
Oh, there you go.
I? I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I don't want to get in trouble. I'm just kidding.
No, I love it. I love that you have a great sense of humor. I appreciate that. And Brandon practiced consumer law, civil litigation, in addition to being president on the Board of Trustees at the Northwest Justice Project. So we're talking about NJP, which is short for Northwest Justice Project, and some of the consumer protection that he had worked on in the first half of the episode. Now I'm going to get into the questions of how listeners, the audience in Washington State, can avoid predatory lendings. What kind of questions should they be asking the lenders? What are their rights? What are the documents that they're entitled to examine and verify and check up on and after they sign the dotted line to agree to work with a loan officer. So I'm going to get into the nitty gritty details, because the devil is in the details. So if I may ask, so let's say I want to buy a house, and I'm looking and I find a bunch of brokers, a bunch of lenders and banks offering to loan me the down payment and actually not the down payment, but the mortgage to the house. And they propose some fee structure and send me this estimate or whatever it's called. And I have this document in my hand. I'm comparing, recommended that, you look at 2 or 3 different options and see who, besides bank rating and credibility, who offering me the what rate, interest rate, as well as the fees that they will be charging, right?
Yep.
And now you pick one that sound good, like say Bank of America. They have AAA rating with the AM Best and various S&P agencies, and now they're good to go. Their fees look good. And then I have another lender who claim themselves to be a broker representing numerous banks, and they convince me that having this number of banks and lenders will allow options and invite me to use them. But then, of course, they will veer it to their primary lenders at some point, who may provide the most benefit to the loan officer, right? So now that I'm facing with this, and I didn't know any of this, but now I'm learning about this process. The document that they send to you in the beginning, before you sign the dotted line to agree to use them, does that document have to be held accountable after the purchase happened? Can you use that as a comparison to see if they have charged you correctly?
Potentially, it's always going to be in the details, and folks should always try, and consult an attorney if for your own individual circumstances. So I'm just kind of not providing actual legal advice. I'm just going with the hypothetical that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But having something, first of all, having something on writing is really important. If someone says, "Hey, listen, it's not in the document, but I'm just telling you this," red flag should go up, because having a writing is something that you can use at any time to prove, hey, this was where my expectations came from, and it's going to be able to be something that the potential borrower can use down the road. Now, I say they may potentially use that document later, depending on what other documents have come in since that first one, right? Mm-hmm. So it may be that you get a first document that says, hey, we're going to give you a loan at 3.5% interest. It'll be fixed for 30 years. Mm-hmm. Maybe something happens later where they found out that there's some kind of a risk, and they say, well, we're going to give you an adjustable interest rate loan. Mm-hmm. And that prior document doesn't hold water. Mm-hmm. It's not a promise anymore. Maybe there are documents saying that. Now, if there aren't, and you have this one document that said, hey, we're going to give you a fixed loan at 3.5%, and you go to make your first payment months later, and it says 6.5% interest, right? That's a problem.
Right.
So, excuse me. So it's very important to pay attention to the loan documents. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of words. A lot of folks don't read through stuff, but it's really important that you do that. You take the time and do that. And if you have questions about things, you should expect that the loan officer, for instance, if that's who you're talking to, is going to be honest with you. And if they're not honest with you, that may be something that you'll have to deal with down the road. So you want to try and get something written down right away. If the loan officer says, hey, don't worry about what it says there, have him or her write it in. Just write it on the document. So you have a recording of that and you can initial it and maybe it'll be typed into something more formal later. But it's really important to take notes when you're talking with people about a transaction that is important and consequential as a loan. So writing things down and understanding what you're saying, what the documents say is really, really important.
Of course. Now we're coming to the end of the our hour, half an hour here. So I wanted to just wrap things up. I appreciate this is just a precursor. And of course, if you have more questions, audience, you're welcome to contact Brandon Donckers. His name is right there on the screen. Is BRENDA. That's his first name, and last name is DONCKERS. And he's an attorney and president at the Northwest Justice Project. If you have more questions, you're welcome to Google and find him and seek additional advice. At the end of the show, I'd like to ask your favorite quote, Brandon. What's your favorite quote?
Yeah, well, there's lots of really good ones, but I'll tell you one that I've been telling folks a lot lately, which is when they go into a deposition, everyone's going, oh, I'm going to be deposed and lawyers got to ask all these questions. What do I do? Well, it's a quote from Mark Twain that I think is really appropriate. It's, if you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything. So,
well, I didn't
good
know
advice.
that. That I did not know that Mark Twain had said that, but good. I read a couple of books from him, and that's good advice. Thank you very much, Brandon, for joining me on Afternoons with Monique. You're on Rainier Avenue Radio, and it's 2022 right around the corner, folks. I bid you a happy new year coming up in a couple of days. I think by the time this show is aired on December 30th, will be like one day until the new year. So Brandon, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here.
Okay.